The first time the creature saw a human girl, she was crying from his vantage point behind the reinforced energy bars. Deep in the bowels of the Ralzek prison vessel Vorkthal, the alien known as Kurvok watched through thin slits of the cell as the guards dragged her in. Her feet left streaks of blood across the blackened floor. Her arms hung limp, and a trail of bruises marred her pale skin like ink blots on parchment. Her eyes, however, gods of the moons, her eyes weren't broken. They stared defiantly into the void ahead, and that was what made Kurvok shift in his restraints for the first time in weeks. He was a Verathi, one of the apex predators of the Outer Rim systems, a being feared by empires. His people were bred in war, raised in frost-covered mountains where only the strong thrived. His claws had once torn through steel, his jaws crushed bone and armor alike. But now here, he was another defeated beast, collared, silenced, watched. He had killed 6 Ralzek guards before sedation finally subdued him. They had stopped trying to break him after that. They knew pain did not move him. But her, the human girl, she was something else entirely. The guards threw her into the adjacent cell, just within view. She didn't flinch when her body hit the ground. She didn't scream, though the impact sounded like bones might have fractured. Instead, she crawled to a corner, pressed her back to the wall, and faced them. She didn't cry anymore. Not then. Kurvok blinked his reptilian eyes, his breath steaming slightly in the cold, recycled air. He'd seen the humans before. Fighters, soldiers, weak bodies, maybe, but clever, stubborn, reckless. He respected them, the same way one might respect fire. Beautiful until it scorched your flesh. But this girl, she couldn't have been older than 15 solar cycles, maybe 16. What was she doing here among war criminals and rogue commandos? What threat could she have posed to the Ralzek Dominion? He found himself watching her for hours as the cycle lights dimmed and the artificial night cloaked the ship. She didn't sleep. She sat there, unmoving, staring up at the flickering sensor node in the corner of the ceiling, watching, waiting. The next cycle, the torture began. They didn't take her far, just down the hall to the interrogation chamber. Kurvok could hear everything. Ralzek interrogations weren't designed to extract information. They were artless performances of domination, a means to break will, not bodies. They wanted obedience, silence, but mostly they wanted fear. He heard the humming of the neuroprobes, the sizzling of electrified whips, the low growls of the sadistic warden class overseers. And through it all, he listened for her voice, expected to hear screams, sobbing, begging. He waited for the cracks in that fire-born spirit to show. They never did. She didn't scream. Not once. And when they returned her hours later, clothes torn and face bloodied, she didn't crawl this time. She walked, staggered, yes, limbs trembling, eyes unfocused, but upright. Kurvok growled low in his throat. Something old stirred inside him, something buried beneath layers of pride, pain, and predator instinct. Disgust at the Ralzek, yes, but deeper than that was something unfamiliar, something like admiration or guilt. He had killed without remorse. Entire battalions, war bands, even civilians caught in collateral flame. But he had done so under the laws of his kind, brutality with honor. There was no honor in what the Ralzek did. Not here, not to her. A few days passed. They tortured her again. Again she returned. Worse this time, shoulder dislocated, one eye nearly swollen shut. And yet she crawled to the wall, leaned against it, and tapped the floor in a rhythmic pattern. Kurvok watched. Tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. It was deliberate. A code? A message? He growled softly. The next day, she did it again. Same pattern, more insistent. This time, she tapped it louder, and once she was done, She looked directly toward his cell, straight into his eyes. She knew he was watching. Something inside him, cold and unused, shifted again. He responded, using his claw. He scraped 3 lines into the wall. Slow, deliberate, a symbol of acknowledgement among the Virathi. He didn't expect her to understand, but she smiled, just faintly, as if even without words, the message was received. She knew she wasn't alone. From then on, the taps became routine. Sometimes it was a code. Sometimes it was a song. Sometimes just a pattern to keep the silence at bay. But it was always something, and Kurvok found himself waiting for them like one might wait for morning. He began to remember her scent, remember the way her face looked, bruised or not, how her hair clung to her cheek in the recycled moisture. He remembered how small she was, and yet how much larger her spirit seemed to grow with every cycle. He began to remember his own daughter. That memory stung. His daughter, taken by the Ralzek during the siege of Vorkral. They had promised safety, promised peace. Then they had burned everything, including the Virathi children. Was this human girl a prisoner of the same war? A victim of the same false promises? He never knew her name. She never spoke aloud. But in the silence between tortures, they shared stories without words. The way she tapped the floor when she couldn't move anymore. The way he carved small symbols into the wall for her. A secret language. A connection. One night, alarms blared across the ship. Emergency lights flared crimson. Sirens wailed. Something had gone wrong. Explosions in the lower decks. Kurvok snapped awake in his restraints. The Ralzek guard sprinted past his cell, shouting in static bark commands. Through the narrow view of his cell's window, he saw black smoke twisting in the distance. And then footsteps. Soft, careful, not Ralzek. The girl appeared, bloodied, burned, one leg dragging behind her, but holding a plasma torch. Her hands trembled, but her jaw was set in stone. She didn't look like a child anymore. She looked like a survivor. She limped toward the control panel, beside a cell, keyed in a series of codes. Sparks flew. The door hissed, then groaned open. Kurvok rose. For the first time in 83 cycles, he was free. She didn't speak. She only met his eyes. And then she collapsed. Kurvok caught her before her body hit the floor. He looked down at her broken form, so light in his arms, yet heavier than the war axes he once carried. He growled, deep and low, then gently laid her against the wall. From the hallway came the sound of boots. Ralzek soldiers, 3 of them. He stepped over her, claws clicking against the metal. He didn't roar. He didn't bellow. He moved like a storm with teeth. It was over in seconds. Blood slicked the walls. He returned to her side. She blinked up at him, barely conscious. Then, for the first and only time, she whispered. Her voice was cracked glass, barely audible. You're not the monster they said you were. Kurvok didn't respond. He didn't need to. He would carry her now, through the flames, through the ship, through every Ralzek who dared stand in their path. And if he died doing it, then he would die having protected the one creature in this galaxy who reminded him what strength truly was. Not muscle, not fury, but defiance. The kind that doesn't scream, even when broken. The kind that never forgets how to fight. He lifted her gently, turned toward the rising flames, and walked into the inferno. It was time for the galaxy to remember why Virathi wolves were feared. Not for their claws, but for what they protected when they chose to. And Kurvok had chosen. Kurvok had never known fear. Not when his warship had plummeted through the burning atmosphere of Varnock 3. Not when 20 Dominion shock troopers surrounded him at the siege of Krell's Gorge. Not even when they collared him like an animal and locked him behind half-sentient walls designed to dull thought and numb memory. But as he stalked the corridors of the Vorkthal carrying the girl, her frail, bloodied frame limp in his arms, he felt something strange stirring in his chest. Urgency, instinct, something feral and primal. He looked down at her face as he moved, smeared with soot, a deep cut splitting her brow. One eye fluttered open now and then before closing again, her breathing shallow. He could feel her heartbeat against his forearm. Weak but steady. The emergency klaxons painted the corridors in alternating red and white flashes. Bulkheads hissed open and slammed shut with the rhythm of a dying beast. Kurvok's claws clicked over the metal as he kept low, moving like the predator he once was, eyes scanning every junction for movement. The Ralzek would be regrouping. They wouldn't let an outbreak go unpunished. They never did. He stopped at a junction and pressed his back to the wall. The walls vibrated faintly. Distant explosions, probably propulsion deck. Someone had overloaded the plasma stabilizers. The girl? No, she couldn't have done all that alone. Someone else must be moving inside this ship. But whoever it was, Kurvok didn't trust them. His concern wasn't escape anymore. It was her. He ducked through a maintenance shaft and emerged into a decompression chamber. Several corpses lay scattered on the floor. Ralzek, their bodies charred and twisted. The air stank of ozone and cooked flesh. The girl stirred in his arms, groaning softly. He paused, crouched behind a console, and examined her more closely. Shoulder dislocated again. Multiple contusions. Her ribs pressed unevenly beneath her jumpsuit. At least one was broken. He gently laid her down and set her arm with a pop. She jerked but didn't cry out. Even unconscious, she refused to be weak. He reached toward the med panel built into the wall and smashed it open with a swipe of his claw. A cloud of surgical mist puffed out. Inside were several stems, a portable dermal sealer, and, luckily, a bone weave patch. He injected her with a stem. Her body shuddered, and her eyes snapped open. For a heartbeat, she looked at him not with recognition, but with something colder, tactical awareness. She scanned the room, assessed her position, and then settled when her gaze returned to him. Still silent, still watching. He knelt beside her. "You've started something you can't finish alone, girl." She said nothing. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound escaped. Kurvok huffed, rising. "Then I will finish it with you." They moved together now, slower than before. He carried her until she signaled to be set down, then leaned on him as they limped through corridor after corridor. She guided him. Her fingers tapped on walls. Codes he couldn't read, but ones the ship obeyed. Doors opened. Maintenance paths shifted. She wasn't just surviving this place. She had learned it, memorized it. He studied her in between glances down the corridors. She wasn't just a victim. The way she traced her path, counted steps, measured breath, was a movement of someone who had spent cycles preparing for this. She had known escape was impossible and prepared anyway. And still, he didn't know her name. They reached the weapons vault of Deck 9, unguarded, lights flickering overhead. The interior was scorched, as if someone had detonated a concussive device inside. Many of the racks were empty, but Kurvok found what he needed. A Verothi-forged shock blade, heavier than most beings could lift. His claws trembled as he lifted it, not from strain, but from memory. Beside him, the girl picked up a sidearm, too heavy for her wrist. She discarded it and moved to something sleeker, an electro-dagger. She tested it against the wall. It sparked blue. The predator in Kurvok recognized it instantly. She wasn't prey anymore. "Why?" he finally asked, voice low, rumbling. "Why fight? You are not strong, not trained. Why not wait for death?" She looked at him, the corner of her mouth twitching. Then, with difficulty, she raised her hand and tapped something against the wall. 3 beats. Pause. 2 beats. Pause. 1. Kervok froze. It was the same rhythm she had used in the cell. 3, 2, 1. Not a code. A countdown. Her escape wasn't desperation. It was a plan. Others? He asked. She nodded slowly, then pointed upward. Command deck. Of course. The central controls. Airlocks. Life support. Ship-wide communications. Whoever was up there had to finish what she started. She took a deep breath and pointed again, down this time. Containment. And gestured, 2 fingers crossing over each other. Prisoners. Others like them. Trapped. She wanted to free them. Kervok's muscles tensed. It was suicide. The Ralzek would expect a break toward the command deck, not containment. But that made it even more vital. If they could arm the prisoners, cause a real uprising, then the command deck wouldn't matter. The Vorkthal would collapse from the inside. He turned to her. I will fight, he said, but not for escape, not for revenge. He placed his claw over her shoulder. For you, for your fire. She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded. They moved. 2 figures, broken but burning, through the ship's veins of steel and fire. Kervok led with blade in hand, carving through the Ralzek who dared intercept them. The girl followed, looting code from dead officers, unlocking doors before they reached them. More than once, she faltered, blood soaking her side, but she never stopped. When they reached the lower decks, the heat was suffocating. Fires burned uncontrolled, and the ship's stabilizers groaned like dying giants. Klaxons howled louder here. The Ralzek had barricaded the prisoner containment chamber, locked down all entrances. Kervok roared once, then slammed into the door with all his weight. It dented. He roared again. Behind him, the girl set the last of her scavenged explosives into the wall. The blast was clean, surgical. The door opened. Inside, dozens of prisoners stared at them, human, alien, half-starved shadows of former warriors. When they saw the girl, bloodied, standing despite her wounds, something stirred in their eyes. Hope. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply tossed the electrode dagger to the floor and pointed at the guards beyond the chamber. They understood. Kervok stood at her side as chaos erupted. The prisoners surged out, howling, weaponless but fearless. They tore into the guards. Kervok and the girl moved together, cutting paths through the thick of battle. She never faltered. He never left her side. By the time the chamber was theirs, bodies littered the floor and smoke choked the vents. But the prisoners stood victorious. She swayed, exhausted, and Kervok caught her once more. One of the human prisoners, scarred, limping, approached. What's your name, girl? She opened her mouth. No sound came out. Kervok looked at her. She has no name. The man frowned. Then what do we call her? Kervok turned to the others. The Ralzek took everything from her. Her voice, her freedom, her name. He lifted her carefully, standing tall. But they could not take her will. The prisoners watched in silence. He looked down at her, then nodded. We will give her a name, he said. And as the lights flickered and the firelight danced over the bloodied walls, the girl finally allowed herself to close her eyes. She had lit the spark. Now the blaze would spread. Fire consumed the lower decks. The prisoners surged forward to the melting corridors of the Vorkthal, armed with whatever scraps they could salvage. Pipes, shock batons, broken weapons clumsily rewired into deadly tools. They didn't march like soldiers. They moved like survivors who had waited too long for justice. The screams of Ralzek guards echoed down every corridor. intercut with metal-on-metal crashes and the howl of collapsing systems. Kurvok moved at the front, his massive frame soaked in blood and soot, eyes aflame with purpose. The girl moved beside him, her face a pale smear streaked with grime and dried blood. Her electro dagger flickered weakly now, battery nearly spent, but she gripped it with knuckles white as bone. Her every breath was shallow, her ribs shifting painfully under each inhale, but she pressed forward. No one questioned her authority. She had become something unspoken, a symbol, a ghost of vengeance wearing a human face. The prisoners called her Ash. Kurvok did not. He knew her only by what she'd become, a force that will forge in torment. There was no time for names now. There was only the mission. They were 30 strong by the time they reached Deck 5. 30 broken bodies, 30 desperate souls. The Ralzek had fortified this deck more than the others. Towers of makeshift barricades blocked every approach, and drone sentries hovered in deadly orbit above choke points. The ship's AI, stripped down but still potent, had activated localized defense protocols. Ash motioned them to stop. She pressed her palm to the wall panel. Her fingers trembled. She keyed in a sequence, short, sharp taps that Kurvok had come to recognize as code fragments. The console blinked, then died. She slumped against the wall. "I need a conduit." Her voice was a whisper, hoarse and sharp-edged from disuse. It cut through the air like shrapnel. Every prisoner froze. It was the first time any of them had heard her speak. Kurvok turned to a wiry man near the rear, his fingers stained with tech grease. "Conduit." The man nodded and scrambled toward a fallen Ralzek unit, prying loose a control node from its chest. He returned with the scorch device and handed it to her. She plugged it into the dead panel and closed her eyes. Moments passed. Then the drones dropped from the air like stones. Lights dimmed. The doors to the forward bulkhead hissed open. She stood on trembling legs, turned to face the others, and pointed. Forward. No speeches. No plans. Just movement. Kurvok admired her in that moment more than he had admired any commander or warlord. Her strength wasn't in words or rank. It was in action, in presence, in the way she dared to fight when everything told her to surrender. They pressed into Deck 5. Ralzek elites waited, heavily armored, clawed, taller than most of their kind. They fought without fear, driven by the Dominion's unshakable belief in their superiority. But they were not prepared for desperation. The prisoners fought with brutality that defied reason. They didn't trade blows. They tore their enemies down, overwhelming with numbers and sheer hunger for retribution. Kurvok's blade sang through the carnage, carving a path for Ash. She was always just behind him, ducking into blind spots, stabbing at joints, disabling at the speed of thought. It wasn't long before they reached the central pillar of Deck 5, the main security uplink. From here, the Ralzek could monitor the ship's power grid, command subsystems, and override lower-level autonomy. Ash made for the terminal. But a figure stepped out of the shadows, tall, armored in ceremonial black. Ralzek commander. He moved like liquid metal, spear in one hand, plasma shield in the other. Kurvok stepped between him and the girl. "Go," he growled. "This one is mine." Ash hesitated. For the first time, she looked at him with something close to fear. Not for herself, but for him. He nodded once, then charged. The clash shook the deck. Metal rang. Claws scraped against shields, and each impact sent shockwaves through surrounding walls. Kurvok hadn't fought a true equal in years. The commander was faster, more disciplined, but Kurvok had fury, and something the Ralzek lacked, a reason to survive. Every blow was bought with pain. Every strike came at a cost. But Kurvok pushed forward, driving Commander back with a relentless rhythm. Blood dripped from his shoulder, down his arm, but he ignored it. Behind him, Ash worked the terminal. The Ralzek systems resisted, throwing up encrypted partitions, locking out core commands. But she had learned this ship. She knew its language. With trembling fingers and blistered hands, she bypassed the inhibitors, one after another. Releasing security grid, she muttered. The command took. Doors across the ship opened. Barracks, armories, escape pods. Every prisoner on the Vorkthal had just been unshackled. The commander sensed a shift and roared in fury, slamming Kurvok backward into a wall. His spear cracked ribs. Kurvok snarled and locked the weapon between his claws, wrenching aside, dragging the Ralzek into a brutal headbutt that dented both skulls. They collapsed, grappling in the blood-soaked corridor. Ash turned from the console. Kurvok was on his back now. The commander's blade pressed his throat. Sparks rained from above. The fight was nearly done. She moved. Fast. She drove the electro dagger into the base of the commander's skull. It sputtered once, then discharged in a single violent burst. The Ralzek convulsed, then stilled. Kurvok gasped, blood seeping from his side. Ash fell beside him, chest heaving, eyes unfocused. He looked at her through a haze of pain. "You waited." She nodded, barely able to hold her head up. "I told you," she rasped. "We finished this together." The other prisoners arrived seconds later. Some tended to Kurvok, dragging him away from the sparking wreckage. Others stared at Ash, their expressions a mixture of awe and terror. She had defeated a Ralzek commander, with no voice, no rank, no name, only will. They brought her to the bridge soon after. The command deck had been abandoned. The captain had sealed himself in his escape pod and jettisoned hours earlier, likely thinking he'd escaped the chaos. He hadn't. One of the other prisoners held up the comms log. Pods adrift. No FTL signature. She locked it before launch. Ash didn't reply. She stood at the central console, hands braced on either side, eyes locked on the display. The Vorkthal was broken. Main drives offline. Life support failing. Dozens of systems beyond repair. But it was still a symbol. Still a weapon. "Broadcast signal?" someone asked. She nodded. A woman stepped forward and activated the array. "This is a general transmission." The woman spoke into the system, her voice echoing throughout what remained of the Dominion's channels. "This vessel is the Vorkthal. It is no longer under Dominion control." She looked to Ash, then continued. "It belongs to the forgotten, to the broken, to the survivors." A pause, then the final line. "And we are not done." Ash turned, scanning the gathered faces. Some were still bleeding. Others had hollow stares. But they all looked to her now, not as a child, not as a tool, as a leader, as a warning. Kurvok, leaning against the wall, battered and breathing hard, watched her with something close to reverence. He had fought wars, led armies, but he had never seen anyone bring fear to the Dominion like this. And she had done it with nothing but scars. The transmission ended, and across the stars, that echo would spread. The Vorkthal drifted like a carcass through unregulated space, bleeding sparks from its ruptured hull, its insignias charred black by fire and defiance. Systems flickered in and out, patched together with stolen code and sheer desperation. Within, the command deck had transformed, not into a throne room, but into a war table where vengeance was drawn in blood and silence. Ash stood at its center. The girl was no longer skeletal, though her eyes still held that void-deep hunger, the kind not cured by food, but by justice. Her once-shaven scalp now bristled with uneven tufts, her arms bearing marks, some from pain, some from memory, some now voluntary. She had begun marking herself with the names of those lost. Kurvok had recovered slower. Ralzek bone spears poison the blood, and even he, built like a tank of war, had taken longer than expected to mend. But he stood now, leaning with one clawed hand against the bulkhead. A jagged scar lined his flank. His gaze never left Ash. "She hasn't slept," murmured one of the crew. What passed for a crew now? Ex-slaves, freed prisoners, tech adepts, defectors. A ragged legion held together by fury. "She doesn't need to," Kervok said. "She dreams awake." The mission had changed. It had grown. Ash didn't just want to escape. She wanted to dismantle. The Dominion had responded to the Vorkthal's broadcast with fire. Patrols flooded the outer sectors, black ships with silent drives and zero warnings. The girl watched the star charts every day, noting troop movements, calculating jump intervals. She wasn't just a symbol anymore. She was the war itself. They'd struck 2 listening outposts already. Silent Dominion relay stations that tracked ship movements and relayed suppression orders to fleet elements. Ash led both assaults personally. She moved like smoke through the corridors, killing without sound. Survivors spoke her name like it was a curse. Not human, not machine, just Ash. Now came the third target, Vault 6 EK, buried inside an asteroid field, guarded by a Ralzek dreadship and a ring of automated sentries. The vault wasn't just data. It was memory, records of everyone who'd ever passed through Dominion prisons, the fates of dissidents, entire bloodlines erased by decree. It held the truth, and she needed it. Kervok objected. Of course. He always did. Strategic, careful, a war-born tactician. But he never overruled her. Instead, he stood beside her on the bridge, tapping commands into the console, bringing up rotating projections of the vault's defenses. "The dreadship," he rumbled, "is built to wipe moons, and you want to thread us through their mine net." She turned, staring him down with those ever-burning eyes. "Yes." He shook his head, half grinning. "Then we better not miss." They didn't. The Vorkthal tore through the edge of the asteroid field like a banshee, engines screaming, shields shorting out every few seconds. They cloaked only once, burning their last field disruptor to pass under the dreadship's scanning arc. Ash and the strike team boarded in silence. There were 10 of them, each selected for specific skills: lockpicking, subterfuge, sabotage. Ash said nothing as they moved. She never did. She simply led. The vault's outer shell cracked beneath the weight of their fury. They breached through a forgotten maintenance shaft, tearing through lower corridors, bypassing alarms before the station's central intelligence could fully process what was happening. Guards fell, some from blades, some from poisoned darts, others from thrown explosives crafted from ship junk. Inside the core chamber, they found it. A column of servers, kilometers high, glowing with heat and data. Ash moved straight for the access node, sitting at the center of a spire-like array. But it wasn't empty. A voice, smooth and artificial, filled the room. "You cannot be here." A hologram flared to life. Not a person, but a Dominion Echo AI. An archivist. "Your flag for deletion," it said. "Your DNA profile has been nullified. Your existence is an error." Ash stepped forward. "You," she rasped, "erased my mother. No record exists." Ash plunged the spike into console. Sparks flew. The AI screamed. Digitized howls of protesting systems trying to eject the override. But the data began to flood. Every document, every name, every disappearance. Truth, long buried. She downloaded it all. When she looked up, the room had dimmed. The lights flickered with systemic collapse. The AI was gone. The vault was dying. Kervok touched her shoulder. "It's done." But her expression said otherwise. "No," she murmured. "This is just justice." They planted charges. The vault imploded behind them, blown apart from within, sending fire and memory into space. They jumped back to the Vorkthal, barely outrunning the incoming dreadship cannons. 2 of the strike team didn't make it. Ash didn't cry. She carved their names into her arm that night. Later, as the others celebrated, she stood alone in the observation deck, watching the ashes of the vault drift through the stars. Kervok approached silently. "You should speak," he said. "To whom?" she asked. "To the galaxy." He hesitated, then held out a small device, an old transponder. She looked at it for a long time before taking it. That night, they broadcast a new signal. Her voice, recorded for the first time. "This is Ash." No title, no rank. "I was taken, stripped, forgotten." Static crackled. "They tried to erase me, but I remember." Pause. "I remember all of you. Every name, every face, every scream." Another beat, and I'm still here. Across the fractured galaxy, the message spread. Outlaw fleets replayed it. Refugee colonies lit bonfires. Even some Dominion officers, secretly watching in locked rooms, felt something cold crawl down their spines. Because she was no longer a myth. She was proof. The Dominion could bleed. The Vorkthal became a rally point. More ships found them. Crippled freighters, defective patrol boats, repurposed merchant hulks. Each carried someone who had lost everything. Each brought fuel, supplies, stories. Ash didn't rest. She studied every new map, every intercepted signal. She was building something, not a rebellion, a reckoning. Kervok watched with silent pride and growing dread. He knew the Dominion wouldn't sit idle forever. Sooner or later, they would send something worse than hunters. They would send him, the Warden. No one knew his real name, only that he commanded the Black Fleet, the ones who didn't capture, only cleansed. Planets erased. Moons cracked. He was a hand that ended insurgencies before they began. And now, they knew he was coming. 3 weeks later, they saw it, the Nadri's Warden flagged, appearing on long-range scans. It dwarfed every vessel in the region. No response to hails. Just a single message, repeated once. "The girl dies. All others optional." Ash read it, then handed the screen back. "Let them come." The others prepared. Weapons loaded. Traps laid. Every corridor turned into a bottleneck. The Vorkthal became a hive of motion, lit with fire and hope and desperation. And then the Black Fleet arrived. Not one ship. 9. Ash stood on the forward deck as the first blast struck their shields. The Vorkthal shuddered. Systems failed. Fire burst along the starboard hull. Kervok stood beside her. "This is suicide," he growled. "No," she said, her voice calm. "This is war." They launched their ships. The ragged fleet, outgunned 10-1, surged forward. They didn't aim to win. They aimed to wound. And for every death, they took a piece of the Black Fleet with them. Ash boarded the Nadri's alone. Through flame and gravity flux, through 1,000 corridors lined with death, she found the Warden waiting. A giant of a being, armor etched with the names of extinct worlds. He drew no weapon. "You caused this," he said. Ash raised her blade. "I remember." They fought in silence. And when it ended, she stood over his body, her own blood pooling beneath her boots. She sent one last message, live-streamed, raw. She looked into the lens, face bruised and burning, and spoke one word: "Free." Then the Nadri's exploded. The Dominion lost contact with the Black Fleet. And somewhere in the ashes of that void, survivors whispered of a girl made of fire and vengeance, who died to remind the galaxy it could still burn. But no one ever found a body. Some say she still drifts in a black ship with no name, visiting broken colonies in the night, watching, waiting. Ash!